Good morning, everyone. It's Amanda. I said I'd do more Facebook Lives with you this year, and so I'm going to. And what I really want to talk about today is the passion I have for this field of genomic medicine or DNA analysis, or you may know it as DNA tests, why it's a game changer in the field of medicine, why I feel it's such a game changer for health. So I'm going to talk about that today. And because there's so much to unpack, I'll come back and talk about it more, sort of dissect the topic a little bit more. That being said, if you have questions about DNA testing, what it means, what are genes, Amanda, can you answer these questions? Post them on this page or send us a message and I will address that because it's such an amazing topic. So today I'm just going to talk about why I see it as such a game changer and give you some answers and explanations. So for me, I've been trained in nutrition science and nutritional biochemistry. I've been working in the field for 25 years. When I first trained as a dietitian, and we really are trained as scientists, I realized that there was something missing in the way I was trained. It wasn't that we didn't learn really good science, and it wasn't that we didn't learn really good nutritional biochemistry. What was missing was the application of it. And you might think, well, what do dietitians do if they don't apply nutrition science? So let's not take that out of context and put it in context here. A lot of the way that we were taught was to understand how nutrition affects systems in the body and how different molecules that involve nutrition change in different operating systems in the body. So I was always curious, like, well, there seems to be some application missing here. How come we're not making a difference in people's health? So I pondered this question for a long time as a clinician. And then a few years ago, the field of genomics really came to light. And what genomics studies is, or are, this field, are genes, and particularly as we look at humans, human genes. And what that means is it shed light on what genes are, which genes are inherent or native to human beings, and what do those genes do in the body. So you're saying, okay, great, well, what does that mean? So the important part about genes is genes produce proteins. And proteins, you know, are structural in the body, so they're essential for muscles and bones, etc. They're also communication molecules like hormones. So vitamin D is actually a communication molecule, even though you may understand it as a vitamin. Serotonin, dopamine, communication molecules. But the most important part, I think, to understand about genes is they produce proteins, and one of the protein categories is or are enzymes. Enzymes are like construction workers in your body. They help get the business of the body done. You can't build a house without materials, but you also can't build a house without the expertise of people who are framers and tilers, do the stonework and the cabinet making, electrical, plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. So think of proteins as doing all these intricate processes, these intricate jobs. So how does this relate to genomics, which I'm talking about? So genes contain the recipe to produce proteins. Sometimes that recipe gets a little muddled as we reproduce cells or we reproduce the protein messages. So it's like making a cake. You might substitute brown sugar for white sugar just to make a different kind of fat, just to give you a very simple example. And just because you change the fat doesn't mean to say the cake is going to come out differently. It may have a different crumb texture, it may have a slightly different color, but it still tastes like a cake. It's just not the original recipe. So in genomics, we understand that genes, when they slightly change the recipe of the proteins that are produced, those proteins may function a little bit differently. So let's give you an example of that. A protein that may produce vitamin B12 has a recipe for probably the most correct way to produce that vitamin. What happens if that recipe is slightly off? You may produce a vitamin B12 molecule that's not 100%. When it's not quite 100%, maybe that will impact how the body uses vitamin B12. It's the same with vitamin D. So this is an excellent example. Vitamin D goes through a number of biochemical processes to be in its active form. Once it's in its active form, it then has to bind to a cell to basically do its signaling work. There are many genes involved in how you not only produce vitamin D in its user-friendly form, but how that actually then binds to the cell to do its work involves other genes, 3 other genes, so VDR, vitamin D receptor genes. So genes are inherent to how we produce the proteins that direct our biochemistry and the processes in your body. What genomics does and genomic testing does is it allows us to now look at how your genes are producing proteins, but how the patterns in your proteins work together to do the job of the human body. So let's look at the example of MTHFR, which everyone's talking about. They'll say, I've got MTHFR. For a lot of people don't even know what that means. What MTHFR does in the body is it actually helps hand off what we call our methyl groups. So these certain kind of hook, if you will, biochemical hook, from folate, which you know is B9, to vitamin B12. It actually handles, it works together in conjunction with vitamin B12 to reproduce a molecule called methionine. So that all sounds very complicated, but the bottom line is we're talking about MTHFR. MTHFR does not work by itself. It's part of a very complex pattern of genes that work together within the folate cycle to actually help produce a molecule in a completely different cycle. In genomics, we're trained not to just look at MTHFR, we're trained to look at the biochemical pathways that shuttle nutrients around the body. And depending on how many blockages there may be in that pathway, it can impact whether you need to eat foods richer in folate, for example, whether you need to eat foods richer in B12, whether in some cases you may need a vitamin supplement because your body, through its gene recipes, isn't working efficiently. So, in summary, what genomics does, and why I'm so passionate about it, is it takes the guesswork out of what's wrong with me. Like, why do I have brain fog? Why do I eat a healthy diet? I'm eating everything correctly, yet I'm always hungry, or I can't shift weight. Why is it that you can eat saturated fat and I don't do well with it, or I can follow a keto diet and feel amazing and somebody else feels absolutely lousy? What genomics does, again, is it takes the guesswork out of what's wrong or how come you can tolerate saturated fat or I can't, or I have brain fog and I'm not sleeping, and you live in the same house, you're following the same diet, you're doing the same exercise, and yet I have completely different outcomes. Genomics, again, takes the guesswork out because it allows us to look uniquely at your biochemical processes, your blueprint, your operating system, without judgment, and piece together the picture of your operating system. Once we understand that, we know how we can work with foods, sometimes with lifestyle management, changes in exercises, changes in stress, but very in how you manage stress. But truly, most importantly of all, it changes how we understand which food and which nutrients are right for you. I liken it of saying that sometimes when I sit down, not sometimes, always when I sit down with DNA information, it's almost like starting with a blank sheet of paper. I don't start with a diagnosis that says, okay, you have this, therefore treat you that way. What I start with is your health history, your information as a human being, your unique lifestyle, the way you're eating, and a blank sheet of paper, and I start to look for patterns that I see from your genomic information. From that, I create a roadmap that says, okay, this is where I think some of the inefficiencies are for you. Let's validate that by looking at some laboratory testing. Maybe I think potentially you may need some help with vitamin D. You may need some help with vitamin A. You may need to push harder on eating those leafy greens. You may need more legumes. Maybe you need a probiotic supplement. Maybe you need to eat foods that are richer sources of fermented or fermented foods. This work in DNA analysis and genomics removes the diagnosis, which is beautiful. But I think more importantly, it explains to you as an individual, this is why you're feeling the way you are. These are the little nips and tucks we can do. And importantly, I think it's very reaffirming. It says you're not imagining how you feel. It's actually very true. Let me explain why and how we can move that process forward, and which foods, which supplementation, potentially, which exercises are going to be most conducive to your unique molecular signature. There's no preconceived format or diet that you have to follow, because genomics removes all of that and looks uniquely at you. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight how we think, why I'm so passionate about this. And I'll come back and give you some more examples that I see, working day in and day out with this amazing science. And of course, ask your questions. You probably got a lot of questions, whether it's from the genomic testing side, whether it's from how does this change what we do in the kitchen? How does it change what kind of food we eat? It's all available for you to ask, and I'm happy to answer. So I hope that was insightful for you. I hope you have a great day. See you on the next live. Bye-bye.